Straight into it, guys. We've got a lot to cover in this full guide for fatigue in calisthenics. This might be able to explain why you're getting a lot of injuries lately, or maybe even why or how to detect fatigue. So maybe some days you're getting a hold in the planche and then a couple of days later you're not able to hold it as long and you don't know why. We're going to explain all of that because there's a lot to talk about in fatigue. It's quite complicated, but we need to know how to manage it so we can train effectively for the planche or whatever static skill. In this video we're going to be talking about strength. That's mainly going to be in the context of static skills, so let's get straight into it. First of all, let's define some terms so you know what I'm talking about. Fitness is the degree of athletic performance that you're training for, so this could be power, speed, strength, etc. Fatigue is a negative effect on the body caused by training and reduces our performance. It's basically extreme tiredness and can be resolved by using recovery strategies. Performance is basically the reason we train, so usually we're practicing to get better at something. So this could be a sport or specific action or activity. Performance will get better as your fitness gets better. However, your fatigue will mask those positive effects that fitness gives you. That's why we want to reduce fatigue while increasing fitness. However, while you train, it's almost unavoidable to start accumulating some kind of fatigue. So when we practice or train for something, usually it's a process of breaking down or creating better neural pathways for that specific movement, whether it's lifting weight, riding a horse, trying to learn the piano, whatever it is. It's usually breaking down and trying to build back better. Usually you'll accumulate some kind of fatigue, whether it's mental, you're learning the piano and it's creating some kind of mental fatigue, your fingers are cramping, whatever it is. But then after a bit of a rest, you internalize that, you come back better. This is the process that I call the improvement process. It's that process of breaking down to get better at something. So if we want to perform at our best in calisthenics, we need to do two different things. Number one, we need to find the most diverse but also specific to our sport ways of training. This is following some of the strength principles. There are 7 strength principles that I'll probably cover in another video if you guys want it. You guys are really enjoying these strength principle videos, so that should be coming, but that's the first thing. We need diverse but also specific to our sport ways of training. The second way we're going to perform at our best in calisthenics is by finding the best way for us to recover. So by nailing down our recovery strategies. This is literally half of performing at your best, or half of your training or getting better at calisthenics is going to be your recovery. So there's the training aspect and the recovery aspect. I was going to make this video fully on recovery. That video is coming, but first we need to talk about that step 1, which is the fatigue, the accumulation of that training and that fatigue, and then we can talk about recovery. So let's continue. So expect soon a full recovery guide for calisthenics that's going to follow on from this. So the first thing I want you guys to take away from this video is that fatigue is pretty much unavoidable if you want to train and get better for calisthenics. You don't want to think of fatigue as something you want to completely avoid. No, there's actually some kind of useful fatigue, or at least you can use fatigue in a good way to see how you're progressing. So when you start doing the advanced tuck planche, it's going to be a new stimulus on the body. So you're going to start accumulating some fatigue, but you're going to start getting better at that advanced tuck planche as you do it over the weeks, over the days. You're going to start getting better and better as you build up that neural adaptations. You learn the muscle activation while you also start building muscle. But over that training sessions, over the 1, 2, 3 weeks of training, you're going to start accumulating some fatigue, which eventually is going to build up to a level where you want to get rid of. But then once you've fully recovered, you'll be closer to that perfect advanced tuck planche. This is the process, that improvement process of calisthenics training and strength training in general. So I keep saying there's different types of fatigue, so let's break them down now so you guys know what to look out for, what the different types are, and when you might be accumulating too much fatigue and need to deal it. Okay, so to explain the different types of fatigue, I'm going to break this down into different categories to make it a bit easier. So the first category is going to be time, and the second category is going to be area. The time category is going to be the more important category we're going to be talking about for most of this video, but the area category is pretty easy to explain, so let me start there. The area of fatigue, or where fatigue is based in the body, can be broken down into 2 different types: peripheral fatigue and systemic fatigue. Peripheral fatigue is the fatigue in the local muscle and tissues of the fatigue-sustained regions. Pretty simple to understand. So if you're doing bicep curls and only burning out your biceps and you feel sore in your biceps, well, that fatigue is localized pretty much only to the biceps, and that's peripheral fatigue. Systemic fatigue is the collective fatigue from local muscle, central nervous system, and psychological systems. So every instance of local fatigue contributes to systemic fatigue. So you have fatigue in specific areas, that's peripheral fatigue, and then that accumulating, even with psychological factors, all of that together creates systemic fatigue. So that's almost the total sum or the overall fatigue within the body. And over the weeks and months of training, you'll accumulate systemic fatigue, but the local fatigue or the peripheral fatigue, that can differ depending on what you're training. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so that was the first category of fatigue already explained. See, that wasn't too bad. So now let's go on to explain the second category, which will be the basis of the rest of the video, which is fatigue that's based on time. So there's two different types of fatigue that's kind of based on time or the timing of the fatigue, and that's acute fatigue and cumulative fatigue. Acute fatigue is the short-term disruption of systems within a session and the period immediately following. Okay, so to explain acute fatigue simply, imagine at the start of your session, you can do a 5-second straddle planche. You do the rest of your training, so you do your presses, your push-ups, your banded holds, all of that, your planche leans. At the end of the session, if you were to test your max straddle planche again, you may only be able to get 1, maybe 2 seconds, maybe even none. And that's because of acute fatigue. There's a short-term build-up of fatigue during that workout and immediately after, where even 30 minutes after your workout, you still probably won't be back to doing that 5-second straddle planche, and that's because of acute fatigue. Cumulative fatigue, on the other hand, is the disruption of systems that affect future training sessions. It's acute fatigue that has never been alleviated. The result is an increasingly higher level of fatigue. So if you don't rest enough, you'll build up cumulative fatigue from your acute fatigue. So the main thing to take from this about cumulative fatigue is that it lasts between sessions and adds up over months of training. Again, I need to reiterate, neither acute fatigue or cumulative fatigue are necessarily bad or should be avoided at all points in time. There are going to be times in your training where cumulative fatigue is going to be natural. It's actually going to be showing signs of your progress, because if you are training hard enough, you will be accumulating some kind of cumulative fatigue because of your training and you're training hard. It's just what happens when you train for calisthenics and for strength skills. So I already said that training accumulates fatigue, but what specific things about training accumulate fatigue? Because we know we don't all train the same. So powerlifters don't train the same as bodybuilders, and bodybuilders don't train the same as calisthenics athletes. So what are the specific variables in training that determine how much fatigue you will accumulate? Well, here's a full list. Training volume, training intensity, training density, training frequency, impact, contact, and direct disruption. So let's quickly break down all of those very fast. The training volume, that's basically the total amount of work or exercise performed. In weightlifting or also calisthenics, we usually use just sets and reps as a way to determine total volume for a specific week. Training intensity is a measure of the quality of work performed. So in the sense of static skills, in the front lever, the full front lever, legs together, is going to be more intense than, say, the tuck front lever. So if you are both doing that in the same exercise, the sets of the full front lever is going to be more intense than the tuck front lever. Like volume, you can measure intensity in a relative sense, relative to that person, so relative to their 1 rep max or their max hold, how hard is that exercise, or you could do it in a more absolute sense, so how much weight are they lifting or what progression are they doing. Training density is the volume of training performed over a specific time span. So say you were doing straddle planche push-ups, but you had to do 10 sets, but you only had 10 minutes to do those 10 sets. That's 1 set every minute. So that's going to be quite high density compared to if you had 30 minutes to do the 10 sets of the planche push-ups. That's going to be less dense because you have more time to perform those sets in. So density can also have an effect on your fatigue. Training frequency is how many times a week are you training, but this will only have an effect on fatigue if you're increasing or decreasing your volume. So that's the important bit still, is the volume. You can train more times a week, but if you're doing less volume in each workout, well, it's not going to be any more fatiguing. Impact, contact, and direct disruption disruption are things like running and jumping, plyometrics, that accumulates fatigue, and quite a bit at that compared to jogging and running. Those are lower levels of plyometrics, and things like direct contact, like in rugby, knocking into things, that accumulates some kind of fatigue as well that needs to be resolved. Now let's go over the lifestyle factors quickly that can contribute to fatigue. Those are going to be daily physical tasks. So if you're going to school and have to walk miles and miles to get to school compared to taking the bus, that's going to accumulate more fatigue. Next is sleep deprivation. If you're not sleeping enough, you're not going to be getting rid of a lot of fatigue, so you're going to be accumulating that fatigue over the weeks and months of training. Psychological stresses. So you probably won't be able to lift at your best or have the best concentration in the gym if you've just been fired from work or your girlfriend broke up with you. I know some people use those as motivation, but in the gist of things, basically if something very stressful has happened, you're probably not going to be at your best mentally and physically, just because of the whole psychological stresses. Okay, back to calisthenics. Now we've done the groundwork of fatigue and how it happens and what it means and the different types. Let's go back to calisthenics and our training program. In a proper program that follows strength principles such as overload, you will find that cumulative fatigue will occur. You will start getting that increase in fatigue over the weeks of training until a level where your performance will be severely reduced. And at this point where your performance is reduced, this is called overreaching. So it's like that example I gave before. If you kept training, you had a 5-second strata planche, you kept training, the next week you tried your attempt again, you were down to 4 seconds, next week 3 seconds. The overload training is unsustainable. You're not actually able to make progress or even keep the same amount of progress. It's unsustainable. So overreaching. So fatigue is super high and your performance is low. You probably want to take a deload straight away, right? Well, hold on guys, because when you're in the overreach state, so fatigue is high and your performance is low, for a brief time, you can get some productive training sessions in, and then once you take a rest, you come back and get the super compensation effect where your body adapts to that bit of training you did in that overreach state and comes back super compensation. You can come back quite a bit stronger. The effect of the adaptations is almost enhanced. It's kind of like in anime when the main protagonist is fighting an enemy. They're pushed to like almost the brink of death, and then once they've beaten the enemy and recovered, they come back stronger. Maybe they learned some new abilities, something like that. And that brief period where you train while in an overreach state that causes high levels of adaptations after you've recovered, that brief period is called functional overreaching. This concept might actually change how you fundamentally think about fatigue. There's actually a period where when fatigue is high, if you train and then recover completely or almost completely, you'll come back with super high levels of adaptations and come back quite a bit stronger. You may have even done this in the past and not known, but now you actually know that functional overreaching exists and now you can plan for it, and I'm going to help you plan for it. However, there is also non-functional overreaching. This needs to be avoided. So let's go through how to avoid non-functional overreaching. Think about it this way. While you're in that overreach state, like we said before, you can get away with a brief period of overreaching where you're still training, and that's functional. You come back way better after that. But if you keep going, and we'll talk about how long you can keep going for to where it's functional, at a certain point, this training will get to non-functional overreaching, where you've trained for too hard, for too long, and you're at your highest risk for injury. And then once you've fully recovered, you would have had almost no adaptations because the body is focused so much of its energy into the systems for recovery, it hasn't actually focused on any adaptations to build back stronger. So you don't get any super compensation effect, and you basically either at the same level or maybe you even come back weaker than you did before you did your training program. This is why you really want to not push it too hard with the non-functional overreaching, and be careful when you're in an overreach state. But let's dive a bit deeper into non-functional overreaching and how we can determine what state we're in. So how can we tell when functional overreaching is going to become non-functional overreaching? We can use specific fitness characteristics to know when we're in a functionally overreached state and when we can estimate that we're going to be in a non-functionally overreached state. So what this graph is showing is how, depending on how many days into your overreached state you are, what specific strength characteristics you're going to see leave first. So what you're going to see deteriorate first. 7 days into overreaching, you're going to find those skills that you already can do start deteriorating. So your form is going to get considerably worse. Maybe you won't be able to do them as well for as long. You know, those techniques are going to be gone and down the drain pretty much. 14 days into the overreach state, your strength is going to take a decline. And then 21 days, you're gonna see body compositional changes, which we definitely don't want. The question here is, okay, we're in our overeat state, but where's a good cutoff point to stop? And generally it's gonna be within the 7 days. So 7 days is gonna be where you wanna be in that overeat state for, where you're functionally overreaching. You don't want to be pushing it for anywhere near the 14 to 21 days. That's the area where you don't want to be in, where the training becomes potentially non-functional, which is what we don't want. So guys, that was very brief. Sorry, I couldn't dive a bit deeper into that. That does need more explanation though. So let me know if you do need more explanation on that in the comments down below, but I can't spend, 20 minutes on this, explaining this for you guys. But let me know, do you want more explanation on functional and non-functional overreaching and how to do that properly? Let me know down in the comments. Overall, what you want to know from this graph is that with overreaching, you only want to be doing it for about a week. When you're getting up to 2 weeks to 4 weeks, that's not going to be good. You're probably in the non-functionally overreaching state and you're probably going to make less gains than you probably could have done. So overall, we know that for calisthenics training, the different aspects of a training, such as volume and intensity, those are the main ones, are going to cause accumulation in fatigue. There's acute fatigue, which is going to dissipate quite quickly, but then our cumulative fatigue is going to accumulate over the weeks of training. This is going to accumulate until a level where your fitness is quite low, your fatigue is high, and your performance is reduced because of this. This is when you're in an overreaching state. You can train for about a week into the overreaching state, which is called functional overreaching, where if you train in this period, you will have some detriment to specific skills. You won't be able to learn new skills as well, and you won't be able to do the skills that you do have as well. But once you take a rest, you'll come back with a super compensation effect, where you'll come back with high adaptations for the specific skill you were training. However, if you do this for too long in an overeat state where you're training and you go into the 2 to 4 weeks area of training, pushing very hard, then it's most likely that you're going to be doing non-functional overreaching, which will result in almost no adaptations and only a focus on recovery when you finally rest, and you won't come back stronger. And that's it, guys. That is the full guide to fatigue in calisthenics. So this is a prerequisite video for the next video that is gonna be on recovery. Thank you to all my channel members. Remember, if you become a channel member, that's as close to personal training as I can offer right now. I do things like one-to-one calls, personal form checks, everything like that. There's also a Discord as well you can join. But until then, watch this video, because this video is gonna be a full playlist breaking down all the strength principles for calisthenics that I've done so far. And when I've done the recovery video, I'll put that here. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.